today's HR training on empathy and evaluations. As we approach the evaluation season coming up, we wanted to make some room for some training, and hopefully this training is very helpful and add some value as you go into your evaluations with your employees this year. I want to do a quick introduction. My name is Abel Johnson. I work here in the growth team. Alongside me, co-facilitating with me is Kyle Galloway. He's also a part of the growth team. And then I also have, you're lucky enough to have a lot of the members of the growth team today: Tiffany Trader, Denise Stringer. You might have some others pop in. Kip, you might see on the attendance as well. But today, Kyle and I will be leading the discussion, and we'd love to have any input as we go along. A couple other housekeeping activities and items on the agenda. This session is going to be recorded. You may notice the reason for that is we like to send out a recap email, similar to the style that Casey and our HR department with our HR fireside chats. We send out an email recap after the training with the recorded training that we had today. If you missed it, or if you have a colleague who couldn't make it today, we'll be sending that out so that you can take and participate in that training. And if you have any questions, you can follow up with our team. A couple other things. If you're not talking, just please, if you can make sure you're muted, just so we don't have any, so everybody can hear what we're saying and we can participate well. So with that being said, we'll jump right into it. Our session's 1 hour, so we'll be ending right on the dot at 11, and we'll create some space at the end of the slide deck for some Q&As as well for those that need some space to think about what we're saying and have some questions along the way. So with that, let's get going. Performance evaluation. So as we think about that, as you can tell from our slide deck title right there, is going to be focused on something a little bit different this year. Empathy is going to be a big part of that. But as you think about the performance evaluation process, why it's created and why it exists, there's a couple of things that it accomplishes. It's a time for us to reflect on, with our employees, on what their accomplishments were that year or what they are. It's a time for us to meet about goals, have a conversation, and also a time to give feedback and make some improvements along the way that maybe need that and need some encouragement. This year is a little different. Different is probably putting it softly. For those, that word may be difficult, frustrating, uncomfortable. And so when you think about evaluations this year, one of the things we're really stressing is that flexibility really is key. Your primary goal should be to help your employees, right? To perform their jobs to the expectations and help them develop. But this requires a commitment and an investment of time and energy, which you all have put in, and we really appreciate that. And as you know, what you put into it is what you get out of it. So we really appreciate the time you've taken to do that this year. And we hope that you keep some of the perspectives and thoughts and ideas that we promote today in mind. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let Kyle jump into the topics, and he's going to kind of lay out what the agenda is today.
Thank you, Abel. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Today's topics, we're going to discuss understanding 2020 and some of the challenges this year has brought us. I think it's easy to say that 2020 has been, if it hasn't been difficult, it's definitely been different. It's been challenging. And we're going to touch base on a piece of that this morning. We're going to discuss empathy and really, what it means, but more importantly, how do we apply empathy through our discussions? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about having the discussion regarding performance evaluations and what the tone sounds like this year. We'll also discuss some things to be mindful of, some things you may not think about. That's usually sometimes HR related. So we're going to give you guys some tips and bits on that. And we have some things cooking in HR for evaluations moving forward after this year. So we have an exciting time where we're looking at implementing some changes to the way we do our evaluation processes. So Abel is the lead on that, and we'll touch base on kind of what to look out for here in the near future. And of course, we'll give you guys some time to ask questions. We didn't have any pre-submitted questions this morning, but we'll make sure to monitor that as well. So if you guys feel free to unmic or submit in the chat any questions you guys may have, so we can have a nice discussion this morning. So with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Abel. We have a question to ask you all.
Yeah. So as we approach this this evaluation season, a lot of those words and adjectives may be flowing through your mind. And I just wanted to prompt kind of a thought-provoking question, which is, in one word or less, which you can't do less, right? Because it's only one word. One, you can do a couple less. But in one word, how would you describe managing your team during COVID-19, during this year that we've had? And put it in the chat box. We have a couple of our teammates that will monitor the chat box as you put them in and as they pop up. But just throw them in there. So intimate, I like that. I like that word. I think that's the first time I've heard that this year.
I think so.
I appreciate that. Motivator. Innovative. Gentry, great. Yeah, I love that. Keep throwing them in there. I love some of these words. I haven't heard some of them. Ever changing. That's very true, more than ever, because we don't know what we're dealing with, and we just take it day by day. Flexible. Yeah. So keep throwing them in there. So as we think about these words, what I love about this group and what I love about doing these sessions is at first glance, I think a lot of us think of words such as, like tough, or, this may stink. This is hard. This isn't what I signed up for. And that, in my mind, that's what I kind of assumed would happen. But as I do more of these sessions, as we do more of these sessions, I'm finding that there's a lot more positive words that are coming from this, such as what we're talking about, right? Like challenging, intimate, motivating. These are great things. And I think the spin on COVID-19, I would say this year, with the way things are and the way performance evaluation is that sometimes those are blessings in disguise, right? Those are opportunities to get to know your team a little bit better, a little bit more intimate, more one-on-ones, more frequent contact. And so I think this year's given us an opportunity to really reflect and take on, this situation in a positive way. And so I really appreciate your comments and thoughts about that. And I really appreciate your willingness to share. So I'll kick it over to Kyle to talk a little bit about understanding what we're dealing with in 2020 and how 2020 is reshaping how we're doing performance evaluations this year moving forward.
Absolutely. Thanks, Abel. Like I said earlier, there's no question that 2020 has been an unprecedented year for us all. As a university, we've had drastic changes with quickly transitioning some jobs and or services to a virtual setting. We've adapted to the work environment to provide social distancing for roles that can't be performed virtually. We are supporting employees through unexpected challenges that they are facing at home, such as virtual school for their children, COVID-19 related concerns or diagnosis, among many more things. Currently, as of this morning, over 74 million people worldwide have been affected with COVID-19. So when you think about, what's been challenging for you as a manager or supervisor, those same challenges and or concerns are also being faced by your employees or staff members. Our lives have changed along with our work. Most social gatherings have been limited, and I'll explain a little bit later on how this can affect someone's work. So here are a couple things to think about, prior to your evaluation with your employees. Does your employee know what's expected of them? Have you set those clear expectations with your employee post-COVID? With a lot of us working in a remote setting or some kind of modified schedule, it can be difficult to have metrics on an employee or staff member's performance if expectations weren't clear post-COVID-19. Some of your employees or staff members may have never left, as they may be essential to the business. So is it possible that they have faced similar challenges as those that are working remotely? And we think so. Maybe walk-in traffic in their department has decreased, or it's possible that maybe duties have been reshuffled or have been affected with this change, right? So we'll touch base on that a little bit later as well. But because this year has been so different, we believe that empathy should play a piece of the part in evaluations this year. And the meat of our discussions are going to be really around the empathy theme and really how to apply it. So this next slide, the Abel is going to lead us in that discussion to make us fully aware and understand how we can apply empathy when it comes to our employees and staff members. So kick it back over to you, Abel.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Appreciate that. So as we talk about, this is really the meat of our presentation. This is the really meat of the training. And I'd love for anybody to unmic and feel free to comment or throw them in the chat box if you don't feel comfortable speaking or anything. But, showing empathy. Okay, how does this tone of empathy and this topic of empathy, really fit into evaluations. And, when we think about evaluations, we think of something as, well, what, did they do their job or not? Are they doing great or not? And those two things typically don't mix in a traditional setting. But what is empathy, right? So if we look up empathy, if we just look up empathy and had the Webster Dictionary definition, it's just understanding another person's feelings, right? But I want to provide a better definition, in my opinion, that's more deep and meaningful. And that comes from someone we all probably know, and many of us, know him and revere him. As Simon Sinek said, empathy is being concerned about the human being, not just their output. So if we think about that definition for a minute, happy to share that YouTube, that TED Talk, if you're interested about empathy. This year we are asking to use empathy, and we're asking to look at someone's performance and output, but also be concerned about the human being. As we know, this year has been difficult for many, and for all of us, I'm sure, in some facet or another, but we should be concerned about each other just as human beings on the human being level, right? We should be asking, how's your engagement? How are you feeling? Are you comfortable? Do you have the tools to do your job? Have we set those expectations? There's so much that people are dealing with above and beyond their output that we'll jump into this later on the slide, but that it's important to ask those questions and to really care and empathize with people on a human being level. So leadership is about empathy, right? It's about having the ability to relate and to connect with people for the purpose of inspiring them and empowering them. So empathy is and should be the theme of 2020 and for our value. And the evaluation process is not an exemption to that. So we want to make sure that that's still being conveyed. Now, as managers and supervisors, you're in a great position. You're in an influential position to understand your employees' needs and their fears and their wants and their struggles. And so, having been a rough year for many of us, how do we do that? Well, your tone, right? Your approach should be one of compassion and kindness, using language that shows that you truly understand their concerns, right? And why projects maybe didn't get done on time, or why they were delayed, or why they were unfinished, or how come you're late to a Zoom meeting every time we get on, you're a couple minutes late. Maybe they're dealing with other things that we can't see, right? Maybe their internet's unstable, and we'll talk more about that. But your approach should be one of kindness and compassion. Now, I want to caveat this conversation by saying what we're not saying is empathy does not necessarily mean giving an employee a complete pass or a hall pass for 2020. We're not saying that. But what we are saying is we should be mindful of the struggles that are being faced during the pandemic and how those struggles have impacted somebody's output in their evaluation. So consider what effective performance really means in light of all that has happened and since the beginning of the pandemic, and as well as expectations, right, about possible changes in the upcoming months, what's to come. A lot of us don't know. So have you checked in on your employees lately? Do you check in with them on a regular basis? More than ever, I would encourage you to do so in this remote world and pandemic that we're living in. Do you understand the struggles your employees are facing? Did your employees do they have the support and tools to do the job and to perform the output as expected? So those are the things that are important. And I think we need to keep that focus in mind as we approach that season. And what we're going to do is transition now into how do I have the conversation, right? How do I take the skills and the conversation, but then how do I also sprinkle in what you're saying, right? So HR, you're saying to be empathetic, but how do I have the conversation, set the expectations, do all that, but how do I show empathy in the process? And so I'll let Kyle kick over to Kyle to kind of explain some of those tips and how we sprinkle on empathy.
Absolutely. So the video, How to Conduct Better Performance Review Conversations, is a great video about having the right conversations with your employees. The video is about 3 minutes long, so I'm going to go ahead and play it, and then we'll recap here in just a few minutes.
Conducting the performance review conversation can be challenging, both for you as a leader as well as for the employee. The employee may be concerned that they're going to be sitting in the hot seat and get judged. They might also worry about how the performance appraisal could affect the potential for them to get a raise. You might be concerned that your feedback could cause them to get emotional or defensive or even argumentative. That's why it's really helpful to have a plan in place when going into this conversation. So I'm going to share with you 7 tips to confidently have the performance review conversation. Tip number 1, don't ad lib. Use the forms that have been provided by your company for the performance review conversation. Number 2, make sure your employee gets to prepare the exact same forms so that you can be on the same page and there's no surprises for them. You don't want them to be frustrated when suddenly they feel like they're being judged for something that they just weren't expecting. Number 3, don't just dive in and get to business. Build some rapport. Set the tone by asking them how their week went. Thank them for showing up to the meeting, and maybe discuss something like how their family is doing or any vacation plans they might have. Number 4, before you give your feedback, first allow them in each category to tell you how they felt their performance was in the past year. Tell them where you agreed with their performance opinions, and then tell them where you may have differed. This is an important phrase. Instead of saying disagree or allowing room for any kind of argument, just say, I appreciate your feedback on that. I would agree you did a great job with X, Y, and Z. Where my opinion differs a bit is, and then give the example. Number 6, when giving feedback, make sure you'll use only observable facts, not assumptive judgments. You don't want to say something like, Mike, it really seems like you've checked out and you don't even care anymore this past quarter. Instead, say something like, I've noticed you've been tardy 3 times out of the last 4 weeks. And in most of the meetings in the last 2 weeks, you've really only participated once. What can you tell me about this? This gives them an opportunity to share their side and really explain what might be going on with them. Which leads us to number 7. They may become defensive or argumentative. If so, as challenging as it may be, allow them the time to vent and listen to what they have to say. No need to prescribe an answer, just listen, and if necessary, ask them to share a little bit more. Want an even deeper dive on how to conduct a performance review conversation? Head over to livingasaleader.com/shop and check out our performance management e-learning bundle. In this 2-part course, we not only talk about the conversation, but we also discuss how to set goals with your employee and how to coach them throughout the year. For even more tips like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel or go to livingasaleader.com and subscribe to our blog. Thanks for watching.
Awesome video. This video does a great job at explaining the importance of your tone, especially when you're going over those crucial conversations. Some things to remember. I think that's really important is really having that plan in place. Come prepared to your meetings. We're not ad-libbing. Building rapport, slowly easing your way into the conversation allows you to really have that balance on conveying what you want to get across as well as listening. Allowing employees to say how well they did and where you guys may agree or disagree. And when it comes to performance management, using only the facts. And we'll touch base on that here on the next slide and why that's extremely important. And really allowing the employee to vent if they have any issues. And, you may not have an answer all the time for them or a comeback for them, but just allowing them to spill out, what their concerns are, and then maybe coming back later on with a solution. That allows you to also, as a manager, to have that trust that's crucial to be built with your employees to ensure that you're taking action against some of their concerns. So here are some other examples or suggestions that you could use prior to your conversation with your employee. We like these phrases because they have the empathy piece to them. Thank you for your contributions during this difficult time. I appreciate how well you've adjusted. We know this year has been difficult, so let's focus on some things that went well. I understand this year's been challenging, but here are some things that went well, and here's some things that we could work, for or work better on for the upcoming fiscal year. Your tone and approach have the ability to turn any situation into more of a positive outcome. We truly believe that. Conversations that start off with empathy gives the perception to the employee or staff member that you do care. And that's what we want to get across, that you may not always agree, but as a person, we do appreciate you as a human being, as Abel said earlier. So the next slide here, we're going to touch briefly on performance management and how it's important. And for that, I'm going to kick it back over to Abel.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate your insights there. Before we move on, are there any comments? I wanted to create some space. I know we're not quite halfway, but I want to create some space for anybody to have any comments or on mic about anything we've talked about so far. And so please do as we continue down this road. And Denise or Kyle or Tiffany, keep me honest if there's some chats coming in or anybody's raising their hand virtually. So I'm on a small screen. I'm trying to see everybody. As we move forward and thinking about the performance management piece, goals are always kind of the center focus for what we talk about. Goals still matter, of course, but they do need to be adapted and adjusted to fit the current circumstances. Employee goals that were set for current year need to be considered through the lens of the pandemic, right? Of the impact of the pandemic. So consider what overall company targets were, like what your organization or your department were, and the time frame, and compare those to year-to-date achievements. If there is a significant overall difference between the project, what people's expectations are and what it got done, we should be focusing on, how was that impacted by the pandemic or COVID-19 or working from home? Again, kind of using that empathy as a lens. But take time to think about your team's goals. Again, we've kind of talked about, do they know what's expected of them? Do they have the tools to do their job? And one of the things that I think as managers, try to do is, how do we measure their performance? And especially, how do we do that during the pandemic, right? It might be a little bit different. And so I'd love to, if any of you have any comments as to what are some of those roadblocks, if you had any, as to how you measure someone's performance during the pandemic. Any thoughts around that? Please on mic. We'll read the comments as they come in, if that's okay. Because I think that could be challenging. And many managers in the past, I think, have asked us that same question. And so any advice, and we're open to hearing what you have to say. If you found a way or method that's helpful, we'd love to hear that. And Kyle and I are totally comfortable with awkward silences. So we'll a minute or two for you to think about that. So please on mic. Zoe, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I was just going to say, this seems like a year where measuring work productivity could lead you to a bad place. Might not. I mean, we've all done some pretty amazing things, but it might not be the point. For me, when I think about what the point really is in terms of performance for my small team, it has more to do with how they contributed to collective morale. Because that was worth its weight in gold this year. So for sure. Not that you can't produce great work and support collective morale, but that just mattered more this year.
Yeah, and Zoe, remind the team and myself where you work, what area specifically? I'm curious.
New student programs. So,
okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for unmiking. I appreciate that. No, you're totally right. One of the things that I wanted to point out to add your comment, and then I'll be quiet for a minute and let other people raise their hand. Give credit to your employees for adaptability this year, right? So kind of going along with what you said, a lot of us have just made the transition from the lily pad to the other lily pad of working remote. So I think sometimes we don't build that into, and our forms don't reflect that, right? Like adaptability isn't a category, but this year's been different, right? And so giving credit for employees for making that change and that transition and contributing to morale and continuing to have a smile on their face and saying, I'll do whatever is expected of me, but I may not come through on that project because this and this happened, but I'll do what I can, and I'm positive and I'm contributing to the team. And I think also a way you can measure that performance. And I think you're right, it's hard to do that, but that should also be part of what contributes to their evaluation, how they produce this year. Great comment. Anybody else? I don't want to pick on anybody.
I have a question, if I can ask.
Yes.
So if I have a staff member who doesn't really have work from home capabilities, and they then are told, like, whether it's mostly through the public health office, that they're not allowed to come to work or this, that, or the other for an extended period of time, multiple times, And thus, like in the fall semester or summer semester, whatever it might be, like they've just missed a ton of time, and thus not making really any progress on their stated work goals for the last evaluation period. I'm a little bit confused of how I'm supposed to move forward with that, because they're in a little bit a different circumstance than like myself or some of my colleagues that can work from home a little bit more easy. And so I just didn't know if there's any HR guidance for that.
Yeah, I think great question. I'll let Tiffany Trader start us off, and I'm sure she has some answers for you. And then if my colleagues have answers to provide, you hear them out.
Yeah, great question, Ben, and thank you for asking it. What we would recommend that you do is hold them harmless. So the time that they're away due to COVID or that they're asked to be out of the office is that you treat it like it was FMLA. So you don't even include it in the evaluation. You only focus on what they did while they were here at work. So if you need to adjust what the expectations are with deadlines and due dates, feel free to do that. But I really appreciate that question. So holding them harmless for things that were out of their control due to COVID is asking.
Is that helpful? Did that answer your question?
It is. Yeah. I mean, it was weird in the summer too, because they would still come to work. And like if progress wasn't being made at a satisfactory level then too, like I struggle a little bit with it, because I as a supervisor wasn't necessarily there to provide a lot of direct oversight like I am now. And so, yeah, it's been a hard balance of like combining the two, where some were pre-issues, some are now just COVID issues of which they have no control over. And so, yeah, that was helpful. Thank you, Tiffany.
I appreciate that. Thanks for speaking up. And again, this is a great space to ask some of these questions. So we totally want to be supportive of that. Tiffany, do you mind reading Francis? And then I think Sunny has a comment that we'll let him ask as well.
Yes, it says, I think that empathy as a practice is built upon listening to understand. The performance evaluation process can traditionally be one-sided and down. It may be more meaningful in this environment and supportive of demonstrating empathy to build space into process for bilateral kind of communication. I really appreciate that. That's a great comment.
Yeah, thank you. And Francisco's totally right. And again, it goes back to the question we keep posing: are you having those conversations with your employees? And so one is, are you having them? And two is, what does that conversation look like? And are you building trust? Is there an open trust feeling where they can communicate with you and you can communicate with them? And it's a working relationship, right? So I think that model, that traditional old school model of top down, is going away, and we're working at getting it more of a conversation. Because as you have more conversations and as you have it more frequently, you're building that trust, which is opening those doors for communication, and you can receive feedback and give feedback, and there's that safe environment. So I appreciate that comment, Francisco. And I think that's kind of our working, we're working towards that. Sunny, I apologize. Sunny, do you have a comment for the group, or did you want us to just read that comment for you?
I don't know if I put a comment in the chat, but I did want to add to what Zoe said, in that I feel like this is a look at qualitative information to evaluate people's performance. And I feel like I've heard a better term than the soft skills, but I think the competencies, I think that's the word I've heard used in the past, to really talk about competencies around communication and that morale building piece. I think that's where the center of the evaluation needs to happen. And so especially for us, I'm in financial aid and I lead the customer service team. We're a team of about 10. And we went remote and started answering phone calls and emails from panicked students, the day we went home from the building. And we had to figure out all that technology, and the adaptability of the team, I think, it was so valuable, and their willingness to communicate when they couldn't work or what was working with their internet or what wasn't. I loved all of that. And I think that's where we need to focus.
Yeah.
So thanks.
I love your comment, because everything you're saying is, and again, I think it takes time to build that, right? You got to have that trust in that relationship. And so again, the traditional approach is we meet with you once a year and tell you what you did right or wrong. and then your compensation is based off of that, where we're really moving towards, let's have a continual conversation, right? Let's give you feedback in immediate time. Let's give you recognition in real time. And so it just becomes more open, and in doing, you're building that trust. And I'm curious, I'm sure that was your approach, or that it's working for your team. And so you must be doing something great in your team.
Well, you hope so, right? Yeah. I feel like we've built an even better culture, because this was such an opportunity to dig deep and say, what do we need to do different? How can we build communication even in a way we didn't before, because we don't have any options now. We have to be online. We have to be communicating, because we're not running into each other in the hall.
Yeah. And again, I think that's kind of what we're saying, is it's a different world that we're living in this year, and who knows for how much longer. But performance evaluation, by force, is changing, right? So how we're communicating and how we're doing that this year is going to be different than the traditional style. I really appreciate that, Sonny. Thank you for your comment. Do we have any other comments, or did we see anything come through the chat, Tiffany, that we want to read out, or anything else that I'm missing before we move on to the next short video clip? We're about halfway through, and we're doing good on time, so I appreciate your comments.
No other comments in the chat box, so keep moving forward. Thanks, Abel.
Awesome. Well, we have a short clip. It's like 20 seconds long, and I'm gonna let Kyle play that, and then we'll kind of talk about why we chose this video. And I'll be watching your faces. I see the reaction. I hope it's a positive one. Go ahead and play that, Kyle.
Look at the cute dog.
Okay, thank you, Kyle, for playing that. This is one of my favorite parts of the training, honestly, because I love to watch your faces as you watch that video. I saw Lynn Humphrey crack a smile, a grin, and a couple others. So why did we choose to put this in here? I think it's a soft reminder that what we're all saying, and probably saying without saying outright, is we just can't judge too quickly, right? In this year with our performance evaluation, with everything that's going on, from one perspective, something is innocent, right? But from somebody else's perspective, it may look wrong. And it's easy to judge and say, well, that employee wasn't here, or didn't produce, or they were gone a lot, or they weren't on chat all the time. They're slacking. We just don't know, right? We don't know. So what we don't know, we don't know. And so it's just a cool reminder. And I think this is a trust bank or something that comes out with these ads. And at the very end, it says, don't judge too quickly. And then it says ... we won't. And so it's just a friendly reminder that there's a lot more going on below the surface that we may know. And so some of that may be affecting, again, our employees' output and who they are. And so I'll kick that over to Kyle to kind of explain a little bit more about some things to be aware of.
Thanks, Abel. Yeah, that's a hilarious video. But, using Zoom for a lot of us, at least for me, this is I believe my 8th week here at BSU. So using Zoom for me was new. Coming from Ada County, we were using WebEx. So it took me about a good 2 or 3 weeks for me to figure out how to start a meeting and how to log into a meeting without a password, because a lot of this stuff was just confusing. So a lot of that stuff is new for a lot of us campus-wide. I think most of us understand how to use it now, but again, like it was said earlier in the presentation, are we penalizing anybody for keeping the camera off during a meeting? Are we penalizing anyone for having unreliable internet connection? I don't know if you guys can see me, but I have my cell phone here as a hotspot because I have 3 kids on online school this semester. My wife's also working from home. So our internet is very slow during this time of the day. So, I wanted to make sure that we had the proper connection for us to have this presentation. So are we aware of things that are going on that you may not be thinking about? And just because someone's not speaking up during a presentation or during a meeting doesn't mean he or she is not paying attention, and also thinking about how school and daycare are having closures every now and then. Are we penalizing anybody for having to drop everything to go pick up their kid because there's a COVID case at their daycare? So that stuff, as Tiffy said earlier, some of these positions are going to be in that harmless category. Unreliable computer equipment. So things to be mindful of as you are having your team working in a remote setting, and as we use the word harmless, are we thinking about approved leaves that have been approved through HR for your employees, such as the Families First Coronavirus Act, FFCRA, or Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA? Furloughs, Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, that could have your employee on some kind of approved block leave of time where they're being held harmless, So just think about things as you guys are going through and looking at the whole package from this year, because there could be things that are out of the employee's control that you need to be mindful of, if that makes any sense. Many of us are also wearing many different hats during this time. Like earlier discussed, some of us are teaching our children from home, we're cooking lunch, and we're working all at the same time. So the perception may be that, for me, I usually cook around 11:45, 12, and then sometimes I have meetings that start at 12 o'clock. So if my camera's off, it's because I'm either scarfing down a sandwich or I'm cooking eggs or something for my kids. But I'm paying attention. But, Kyle, is he unavailable because his camera's off? Or he doesn't respond quickly enough? So is he paying attention? And the answer is, like we said earlier, the whole package is, we don't know what's going on unless we're asking, right? So if you find that there are things that can be adjusted as far as time goes regarding maybe meetings, then that's something that you may need to explore at adjusting for your team. So when we think about, the balance, that's been new for a lot of us, we're pivoting very quickly. You see a piece of it on the iceberg, but you're not seeing the whole picture beneath the surface. And I really like this iceberg picture that Abel's going to discuss here in a second, because it really allows you as a manager to sit back and take a look at the whole picture as you build those relationships with your team. So if you see a piece of it, you don't see the whole pie at the bottom. And Abel, do you want to touch on the perception versus reality piece regarding that?
Thanks, Kyle. And please on mic if you have any thoughts, questions that we're talking about this discussion. We'd love to have your input. We've touched on it a couple times today, but this is a good visual representation, and a lot of us have heard of the iceberg effect. But I think it's very applicable right now with our employees and our individuals working from home, where again. If you ever want to get a laugh, go to YouTube and find some Zoom work from home fail videos of people walking in the background and just funny things. And, all of that is very true. It's very true, probably more than we want to admit. I've got a couple of kiddos and they run around in the back, my background sometimes, and they're the 3-year-old's in underwear and he's throwing his jammies at my head as I'm talking. So, it's hard. But I think what we're saying is, going back to the not judging too quickly, a lot of what's under the iceberg that are part of an individual, a human being, is their lifestyle, their psychological and motivational levels, their spiritual levels, their mental health, right? All these things are part of all of us. And, what we're seeing is a lot of that is being agitated, and some of that's coming up to the surface and maybe affecting somebody's work or who they are, or people that are struggling with different things, depression, anxiety, all of these things are part of all of us, right? But they may be agitated more because of our working from home, remote settings. And so all of that, just being aware of that lens of what's below the surface and how that's affecting your employees, and their performance and their output as we go towards a performance evaluation. So before you mark like a 2 or a 3 or whatever you're marking and you're rating and you're looking at your employee, this is just another perspective of looking at that, and seeing, well, have they done the best they can, right? Are we giving credit for adaptability? Have they been a good team player? And maybe not all those things reflect on that form. And again, that form, wasn't designed to reflect all the stuff in COVID-19 that we're living in. But how are those things being credited and given credit for on behalf of our employees during this transition and during their evaluation? And so those are just things to think about. One of the things that we really want to focus on a little bit more on one of the levels of the iceberg is the health piece, the mental health during the pandemic. And one of the great opportunities we have in HR is to partner with someone you all have probably heard of, and we very renowned individual is Matt Neese. And so Matt does a great job of eloquently explaining the mental health and the well-being of an individual, and us as employees taking care of ourselves, especially during this work from home COVID pandemic. And so we were able to capture some time with him, and we have a small clip to play you, and we'll send this clip out with our slide deck and all our recap email after the session, so you can listen to the whole talk. But we're going to go ahead and show a quick clip of that, if Kyle, you don't mind starting that off, and then we'll recap.
When it comes to applying my knowledge of empathy, there's a really great framework that helps me keep in check. On one end of the spectrum, there's what we call cognitive empathy. This is when I understand cognitively what's going on for another person emotionally, but I don't have my own emotional connection to that experience, and therefore don't care enough to do anything about this understanding. On the other end of the spectrum, there's emotional empathy. This is when I'm connecting so much emotionally with my perception of what the other person is feeling that I lose myself in a moment. I become flooded with my own emotions in an attempt to align with the other person, that I'm unable to be helpful in that situation. And then in the middle, there's what we call compassionate empathy, which, as you might expect, is a healthy blend between the first two. Based on my working knowledge of this person's life, when I'm feeling compassionate empathy, I have enough information to infer what they are likely experiencing. I have enough emotional connection to this person and their circumstances to have the desire to help. And because I'm staying grounded in my own identity, I'm able to be moved by this experience and the ability to compassionately or empathically support this person.
Yeah, Matt does a great job. One thing in HR that I've learned over my years is HR is not the end all be all. We don't have all the answers, nor are we always the experts. So having somebody like Matt to discuss empathy that aligns, with, our theme this year, to be a thought partner on other projects for us campus-wide, I think that was tremendous. And it shows that it's not just coming from an HR standpoint, but it's coming from a professional who is very competent in that world of empathy and how to apply it towards mental health. So we want to thank Matt for his contributions, and allowing us to pick his brain a bit. So he's a great thought partner. So again, a great video that we wanted to show you all to ensure that, the message that we're trying to convey this year is not just from an HR standpoint, but it's really from a holistic campus-wide approach coming from experts that we have throughout the campus. So we appreciate Matt for that.
When it comes to
as we transition to mental health, like Abel said earlier, the empathy theme is really understanding someone's life struggles. According to the CDC, the COVID-19 pandemic has been stressful for people. Fear and anxiety about a new disease and what could happen can be overwhelming and cause strong emotions in adults and in children. Public health actions such as social distancing can make people feel isolated and lonely and really increase their anxiety and stress levels. And ultimately, like I just said earlier, this can affect someone's work if we're not proactively engaged with them to ensure that they have a positive outcome. Stress during an infectious disease outbreak can sometimes cause, fear and worrying about your own health or the health of your loved ones. It changes your sleep or eating patterns. It could have, issues with chronic health problems and worsening mental health conditions, and increase the use of tobacco and alcohol and other substances. So many employees and staff members here on campus have those very same worries. So during this time, is it appropriate for us to show a little bit of grace and empathy? And the answer is yes. Again, the empathy theme needs to be inserted because as a manager, it's our job to provide the tools such as EAP and other programs to ensure that your employees or staff members have the right tools in place and to be in a position to succeed. So as we start to wind down, Abel will give us an update on kind of what's to come next out of HR, since we're kind of low on time. And Abel, I'm going to pass it over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Kyle. Really appreciate statistics. A lot of us, we know, we've heard of those statistics, and it's kind of a healthy reminder of holistically what all of us are going through and what may affect someone's output. So I really like Simon's TED Talk on empathy and focusing on the human as well as the output. So really great reminders. As we wind down, we'll leave some space for some questions as well. What's on the horizon? What's changing in HR? What are some things that we're thinking and in the cooker? As you know, we're very passionate about the constant communication and relationship, as we've discussed, and many of you have comments about it. And what we're really trying to push towards is more frequent check-ins. Something that's more informal, but something that's more consistent and more meaningful throughout the year, and not just one big conversation at the end of the year that's tied to your performance and your metric and your salary. So we really are looking for models and exploring options. There's other organizations that have done this, and we've done our research, and they've put out papers and research on it, and we're reading that and digesting that. But we're really looking for more frequent check-ins, more meaningful conversations, more frequent, and really focusing on developing people. You know, we're people developers as well as, the ones that have put out the output and make things happen. We want to develop our people as well. And part of that, more check-ins and more frequent check-ins and conversations, is that we're building trust and transparency in that relationship. We're more innovative in how we approach things. One of the other things we're thinking of creating is videos, maybe showcasing how those check-ins should look like, or some examples of how I would have a check-in. What are things I should be discussing in those one-on-ones with my employees? Some other tips and tricks for both managers and employees. You know, if I'm meeting with Tiffany on my check-in, what are some things that I can bring to the table as an employee? And what are some things that the manager can bring to the table to foster that conversation and create a space where I feel I can say what's on my mind, and I can tell them, tell her what things I want to work on and where I want to go in 2 years, and what skills I want to develop and what's worrying me and what's affecting my work. So those are all good things that we want to foster in those check-ins. As well as we'll have some templates around goal settings and how to do that, and how do I help my employee, and some of the other things that we always provide in HR. But that's what's on the horizon. That's what we're looking for. We're always open for feedback, and we're always open to have some thought partners, as many of you have been on campus in our journey towards that goal. And so please feel free to reach out to the HR growth team, and we can always set up some time and offline and chat about that. So with that in mind, we have 10 minutes, which is perfect. So we'll switch to our last slide, and we'll leave kind of the door for any questions. I know we've had some good participation and questions already, but if you have any other questions that you'd like to unmic or throw in the chat, and we'll read those chats out loud, that we can help you, we'll go ahead and do that right now. And I'll just say this real quick. If you don't have any questions, feel free to hop off. But before you do, we do want to just gracefully and humbly thank all of you for your service and the wonderful work that you're doing as supervisors and managers in your own respective areas. We know that it's a hard job. We know it's very difficult, especially the situations that we find ourselves in this year. But we want to thank you for the work you're doing, the work that's seen and unseen. And we're very aware that it's difficult, but we appreciate, and we know that it'll be a big return on investment by investing in our people and their engagement here on campus. So thank you for the work you do. Looks like we have a couple questions or hands. Ben, do you have a question?
I do. First, thanks for offering this training. It's been great. Last year when I went to the evaluation training, Jordy was talking about the possibility that you all were working on a more Boise State specific evaluation, just because that can be a hard piece. Like, we're evaluating everyone across the state with very different jobs on the same eval form. Is there any progress with that, or COVID kind of stopped probably a lot of that stuff? That was the question.
It's a great question, Ben. In fact, that process has been slowed, I'd say, by COVID-19, but that is definitely on the docket of exploring, because part of the model that we want to go to does require us to still figure out how do we evaluate somebody at the end of the day. How do we assign them a metric, or how do we report that to the state of Idaho? And so we do still have requirements on our end that we're required on a legislative level from DHR to submit to them. So that form has to be revamped, and we have to, unfortunately, we have to get approval as well from the state to have a different form. So that is still something that's on the docket. We're still going to explore that as we move to a different model, but it has been slowed. So I wanted to give you a good update on that. I appreciate your. Any other questions or thoughts? Kyle, but while we still have a few individuals on the call, did you also want to remind our team where they can find the online form? I know Tiffany put it in the chat box, but do you want to kind of explain our process for the online platform we created?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe all of the documents, we did create a video regarding how to fill out the actual form, for DHR, and, how to insert the criteria that's needed on our growth webpage. So if you go to BSU's HRS page and click on the growth tab, you'll find not only the content here and videos regarding evaluations, but you also find a video on how to fill out the form properly. So we recommend that you guys check out the HR growth page. There's a lot of great content out there and a lot of good information regarding, our services as a team, including that of evaluations. So, did I hit that? Am I missing anything else as far as where to go? This session will be recorded. You'll also find it on YouTube. So we have a lot of information out there for you all, and we're always looking for feedback and suggestions. And if there's anything you want to see from us, our information here is on this last slide. Please reach out to us. We're rather new to the team, but we're still here to serve. So, feel free to reach out. We're looking forward to networking and partnering with you all.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for joining the call today. Feel free. We'll give you back the 6 minutes, and please let us know how we can help. And please check out all our resources on HR. Thank you for all the participants, Ben, Zoe, everybody who commented. I'm probably missing a few names, but thank you for joining us today. And please let us know how we can help you.
Have a great day, y'all.